The first warning came on a Tuesday morning when every screen on Earth flickered with the same message. Ships had been detected beyond the moon, and they were not from any nation humans knew. Within hours, the sky itself seemed to change, as massive shadows blocked the sun in cities across the world. The Keithrani had arrived. They were tall creatures, standing nearly 3 meters high, with gray skin that looked like stone and eyes that glowed a faint purple. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had created. Their ships moved without sound, and their weapons could melt steel from a kilometer away. They landed in waves, first in the empty places, the deserts and the frozen lands, as if testing the ground beneath their feet. The governments of Earth tried to speak with them. Messages were sent in every language, mathematical signals, pictures of peace, offerings of trade. The Keithrani did not answer. They simply waited, building their camps and assembling their forces. When they finally spoke, their words were cold and simple. Earth had resources they needed. Humanity had 7 days to surrender or face destruction. The world fell into chaos. Some people ran, though there was nowhere to go. Some prayed. Some fought each other for food and shelter. But many others stood still and felt something rise inside them, something old and stubborn. They would not give up. They would not bow. Private Marcus Webb was 23 years old when the Keithrani came. He had joined the army 2 years before, hoping to pay for college and learn some discipline. He had never expected to fight an actual war, much less a war against beings from another world. But when his unit received orders to defend the city of Houston, he packed his gear and got on the transport without complaint. The city had changed in the week since the aliens arrived. Half the population had fled, leaving streets empty and buildings dark. Those who stayed were either too stubborn to leave or had nowhere else to go. The military had set up barriers around the downtown area, using whatever they could find. Cars were pushed into walls, sandbags were stacked high, and trenches were dug through parking lots and parks. Marcus met his squad at a corner near an old office building. There was Sergeant Rivera, a woman in her 40s who had served for 20 years and had seen action in 3 different countries. There was Chen, a young man from California who talked too much when he was nervous. There was Johnson, a quiet giant from Texas who never said anything unless he had to. And there was Lopez, a medic who carried more bandages than bullets. They set up position on the 5th floor of the building, looking out over a wide street that led toward the edge of the city. In the distance, they could see the glow of the Keithrani camp, a ring of blue light that hurt to look at directly. "How long do you think we have?" Chen asked, peering through his binoculars. "No idea," Sergeant Rivera answered. "Could be hours, could be days, just stay ready." Marcus checked his rifle for the 10th time. It felt small and useless against the enemy they faced. He had seen the videos, grainy footage from other cities that had already fallen. Keithrani soldiers moved like shadows, their armor deflecting bullets as if they were rain. Human forces had fought back, but they had died in waves. Still, he did not feel afraid. Or maybe he did, but the fear was buried beneath something heavier. He thought of his mother back in Ohio, of his little sister who was just starting high school. He thought of all the people who could not fight, who were counting on soldiers like him to stand between them and the darkness. If he was going to die, he would die on his feet. The first attack came at sunset on the 7th day, exactly when the Keithrani had promised. The sky lit up with streaks of purple fire as their ships launched the assault. Explosions rocked the city, and buildings collapsed in clouds of dust and flame. Marcus gripped his rifle and watched the street below. They came in groups of 10 Keithrani soldiers marching forward with weapons raised. Their movements were precise, mechanical, like insects following a pattern. They did not run or take cover. They simply advanced, confident that nothing could stop them. "Hold fire until they reach the first barrier," Rivera ordered. Marcus waited, his heart pounding. The Keithrani grew closer, their footsteps making the ground shake. When they passed the first burned-out car, Rivera gave the signal. The noise was deafening. Every soldier in the building opened fire at once, sending a wall of bullets into the street below. For a moment, Marcus thought it was working. Several Keithrani stumbled, their formation breaking. But then they raised their shields, shimmering barriers of energy that appeared from devices on their arms. The bullets sparked and vanished against the light. "Aim for the gaps," Rivera shouted, "the joints in their armor." Marcus adjusted his aim, focusing on the narrow space between a Keithrani's chest plate and shoulder. He squeezed the trigger and saw the creature jerk sideways. It did not fall, but it slowed, clutching the wound. Purple blood, dark as oil, dripped through its fingers. More soldiers appeared at windows up and down the street, firing from every angle. Grenades exploded among the Keithrani ranks, sending bodies flying. For a few glorious minutes, it seemed like humanity might have a chance. Then the Keithrani returned fire. Their weapons made no sound, just a flash of purple light followed by devastation. The building across the street crumbled, its upper floors sliding down in an avalanche of concrete. Marcus saw soldiers fall, their bodies burned beyond recognition. The smell of smoke and something worse filled the air. "Fall back to the lower floors," Rivera ordered. "We need better cover." They ran, stumbling down the stairs as the building shook around them. Behind them, Marcus heard the crash of the Keithrani breaking through the barriers. They were inside the city now, pushing toward the heart of the defense. The next hours blurred together in Marcus's memory. They fought from building to building, retreating when they had to, standing when they could. He lost track of how many times he fired his weapon, how many times he ran, how many times he thought he was about to die. Chen took a hit to his leg, and Lopez dragged him to cover. Johnson found a heavy machine gun in an abandoned vehicle and used it to slow the Keithrani advance for nearly 20 minutes before the weapon jammed. By midnight, they had been pushed back to a cluster of buildings around the old convention center. Maybe 100 soldiers remained from the thousands who had started the defense. They were surrounded, low on ammunition, and exhausted beyond words. But they were still standing. Marcus crouched behind a wall of sandbags, reloading his rifle with hands that would not stop shaking. Beside him, Sergeant Rivera was talking into a radio, trying to reach anyone who might still be fighting. "This is Delta Squad, Sector 7, she said. "We are still holding. Repeat, we are still holding." Static answered her. Then faintly a voice broke through. "Delta Squad, this is command. Reinforcements are coming. Hold your position. Help is on the way." Marcus did not know if he believed it, but he checked his rifle one more time and turned to face the darkness. The reinforcements arrived just before dawn. They came not as a single army but as fragments of every force that had managed to survive the night. Soldiers from different nations, some wearing uniforms Marcus had never seen, poured into the convention center area. Trucks loaded with ammunition rolled through broken streets. Medics ran from body to body, separating the living from the dead. Marcus watched them come with eyes that felt too tired to stay open. He had not slept in over 30 hours, and every part of his body ached. But when Sergeant Rivera told them to move to a new position, he stood up and followed without question. The Keithrani had paused their assault during the night. No one knew why. Perhaps they were regrouping. Perhaps they were surprised that any resistance remained. Whatever the reason, the humans used every moment to strengthen their defenses. Walls were built from rubble and wrecked vehicles. New weapons were distributed, including some experimental technology that the military had been saving for desperate times. Scientists worked alongside soldiers, explaining how to operate devices that had never been tested outside a laboratory. One such device was given to Johnson, who studied it with the same quiet focus he gave everything. It was a kind of energy disruptor, designed to interfere with the shields the Keithrani carried. No one knew if it would work, but Johnson nodded and strapped it to his back without complaint. Marcus found himself assigned to a mixed unit, soldiers from his own squad combined with survivors from other battles. Among them was a young woman named Yuki, a pilot whose helicopter had been shot down on the first day. She had walked 20 miles through enemy territory to reach the defense line, and her eyes held the same exhausted determination that Marcus felt in his own chest. "You think we can win this?" she asked him as they filled sandbags together. Marcus considered the question. A week ago he would have said no. The Keithrani were too strong, too advanced, too many. But something had changed in the past day. He had watched ordinary people do extraordinary things. He had seen soldiers keep fighting when any reasonable person would have surrendered. He had felt that stubborn fire in himself, the refusal to give up even when giving up made sense. "I think we can make them bleed," he said finally, "and maybe that is enough." The Keithrani attacked again at noon. This time they came with more force, their ships providing cover fire from above. The sky turned purple with the light of their weapons, and the air itself seemed to burn. But the humans were ready. Johnson activated the disruptor at the exact moment the first wave of Keithrani reached the barriers. A pulse of energy swept outward, and for a brief moment, the alien shields flickered and died. In that moment, concentrated fire from every human position tore into the unprotected ranks. The Keithrani fell by the dozens. For the first time, Marcus saw fear in their glowing eyes. They had expected easy victory, and instead they found a species that would not break. The battle raged for hours. Ground was lost and regained. Soldiers fell and others took their place. Marcus fired until his rifle was too hot to touch, then picked up another from a fallen comrade and kept firing. At some point he realized that Chen was fighting beside him again, his wounded leg wrapped in bandages but still carrying him forward. "Thought you were supposed to stay with the medics," Marcus shouted over the noise. Chen grinned, though his face was pale, got bored. By evening, the Keithrani had retreated again. They had pushed further into the city than before, but they had paid a terrible price. Bodies littered the streets, human and alien alike. The air smelled of smoke and blood and something chemical that made Marcus's eyes water. But the defense still held. That night something unexpected happened. A transmission came through on all frequencies, alien and human alike. It was a Keithrani voice, translated through some unknown technology into rough English. "You were supposed to surrender," the voice said. "Your species was supposed to be weak. We have conquered 100 worlds. None have resisted like this." Sergeant Rivera grabbed a radio and answered before anyone could stop her. "Then maybe you do not know humans very well." There was a pause. Then the Keithrani spoke again, and this time there was something different in the tone. Not quite respect, but something close to it. "We will return tomorrow, and we will not underestimate you again." The transmission ended. For a moment the soldiers stood in silence. Then slowly a sound began to spread through the ruins. It was laughter, rough and tired but real. They had survived another day. They had made the invaders take notice. Marcus found a patch of concrete that was mostly clean and lay down. He was asleep in seconds, his rifle still clutched in his hands. Around him, other soldiers did the same, stealing rest wherever they could find it. Tomorrow would bring more fighting, more death, more pain. But for now, they had earned a moment of peace. In his dreams, Marcus saw the stars. They were not cold and distant as they had always seemed before. They were bright and close, and somewhere among them, other beings were watching. He did not know if they were friends or enemies or simply curious observers, but he knew that humanity had announced itself to the universe in the loudest possible way. They had said, with blood and sacrifice and stubborn courage, that Earth would not fall easily. When he woke, the sun was rising over the broken city. Smoke still rose from a dozen fires, and the distant glow of the Keithrani camp was still visible on the horizon. But the sky above was clear and blue, the same sky that humans had always known. Marcus stood up, checked his rifle, and walked to his position. The fight was not over, but he was ready. The third day of the siege was the hardest yet. The Keithrani came with new weapons and new tactics, having learned from their earlier failures. Their ships flew lower, providing closer support for the ground troops. Their soldiers moved in tighter formations, protecting each other with overlapping shields. And they brought something new, tall machines that walked on 4 legs and carried cannons capable of reducing buildings to dust. The first of these machines appeared at dawn, striding over the rubble like some ancient beast. Its cannon fired once, and an entire block of buildings simply ceased to exist. The shock wave knocked Marcus off his feet and left his ears ringing. "Everyone back," Rivera shouted. "Fall back to the secondary line." They ran, but the machine was faster. It killed a dozen soldiers before they reached cover, its cannon firing with mechanical precision. Marcus dove behind a concrete barrier and pressed himself flat as debris rained down around him. "We need to take that thing out," Yuki said, appearing beside him. "If we do not, it will destroy everything." "How?" Marcus asked. "Our weapons barely scratch it." Yuki was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the machine as it advanced. Then she pointed at something in the distance, a crashed helicopter half buried in rubble. "I have an idea, but I need covering fire." Marcus did not ask what the idea was. He simply nodded and began to shoot at the machine, drawing its attention. Other soldiers joined him, their bullets sparking uselessly against the metal hide. But it was enough. The machine turned toward them, its cannon charging for another devastating blast. Yuki ran. She sprinted across the open ground, faster than Marcus thought possible, and reached the helicopter just as the machine fired. The shot went wide, pulverizing the street where she had been a second before. She disappeared into the wreckage and emerged moments later, carrying something heavy. It was a missile, one of the anti-armor weapons the helicopter had been carrying when it crashed. Yuki lifted it onto her shoulder and aimed at the machine. "Everyone down," she screamed. Marcus pressed himself into the ground. He heard the whoosh of the missile launching, then a tremendous explosion that shook the earth. When he looked up, the machine was falling, its legs crumpling beneath it. Flames poured from a hole in its chest, and its cannon fell silent. Yuki walked back to the barrier, smoke rising from her clothes. She was grinning. "One down," she said. "How many more do they have?" The answer came quickly. 3 more machines appeared, advancing on the defense line from different directions. But now the soldiers knew they could be killed. Teams were organized, each one assigned to find and destroy weapons that could hurt the machines. Missiles were recovered from crashed vehicles. Explosives were rigged and hidden in the paths the machines would take. Every possible resource was used. By midday, 2 more machines had fallen, but so had many soldiers. The cost of each victory was measured in lives, and Marcus watched friends and strangers alike fall beneath the alien assault. Chen was one of them. A stray shot caught him as he ran between positions, and he went down without a sound. Marcus tried to reach him, but Lopez was faster. The medic dragged Chen behind cover and worked on him for what felt like hours. "He will live," Lopez said finally, his hands covered in blood. "But he cannot fight anymore." Chen looked up at Marcus with glassy eyes. "Finish this for me," he whispered. "Make it mean something." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Then he picked up his rifle and went back to the fight. The afternoon brought a change in the Keithrani tactics. They stopped advancing and began to bombard the defense line from a distance. Ships flew overhead in endless circles, raining fire down on any position that showed itself. Movement became impossible. Soldiers crouched in basements and tunnels, waiting for the assault to stop. It did not stop. The bombardment continued for hours, slowly grinding the defenses to dust. Buildings that had survived earlier fighting collapsed. Barriers that had held for days crumbled. The perimeter shrank, pushing the defenders into a smaller and smaller area. By nightfall, the remaining human forces occupied a single square mile around the convention center. They were completely surrounded. The Keithrani had cut off all routes of escape and were preparing for the final assault. Sergeant Rivera gathered the surviving officers in the basement of the convention center. Marcus was there, having been promoted to corporal after his previous commander fell. He looked around at the faces, seeing exhaustion and fear, but also something else, a hardness, a resolve. "We cannot hold this position," Rivera said. "They have too many soldiers, too many ships, too many of those walking machines. If we stay here, we die." No one argued. They all knew it was true. "But I did not come here to die," Rivera continued. "I came here to fight, and I think there is one more thing we can do." She spread a map on the table, marked with symbols showing the Keithrani positions. Her finger traced a path through the enemy lines, ending at a large building near the edge of their camp. "Our intelligence suggests this is their command center. If we can destroy it, we might throw their entire operation into chaos, maybe long enough for reinforcements to arrive, maybe long enough to turn the tide." "How do we get there?" Johnson asked. "We do not walk, we dig." Rivera pointed at a network of maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the city. "These tunnels connect the convention center to a station near the edge of the Keithrani perimeter. From there, we move fast and quiet, hit them before they know we are coming." It was a desperate plan, a suicide mission most likely, but when Rivera asked for volunteers, every hand in the room went up. They moved at midnight, 200 soldiers crawling through dark tunnels that smelled of mold and old water. Marcus was near the front, his rifle ready, his eyes straining against the darkness. Behind him came the others, a chain of humanity moving toward almost certain death. The tunnels were narrow and cramped, forcing them to move single file. Progress was slow. Every noise echoed dangerously, making them freeze and listen for pursuit. But the Keithrani did not seem to know about the tunnels, and the humans crept forward undetected. After what felt like hours, they reached the exit point. It opened into a parking structure that had been abandoned when the invasion began. Through the gaps in the walls, Marcus could see the Keithrani camp, its blue glow filling the sky. "We move in teams," Rivera whispered. "Strike fast, cause as much damage as possible, then regroup at the rally point. And remember, we are not trying to survive this. We are trying to hurt them so badly that they never forget what humans can do." Marcus nodded. Around him, soldiers checked their weapons and exchanged final words with friends. There were no long speeches or tearful goodbyes. There was not time for that. Only the quiet preparation of people who knew what they were about to do. "For Earth," Rivera said. "For Earth," they answered. And they charged into the light. The assault on the Keithrani command center was chaos from the first moment. Alarms began wailing as the humans burst from the parking structure, and alien soldiers scrambled to respond. But the surprise was complete. The Keithrani had not expected an attack from inside their own perimeter. Their formations were scattered, their response disorganized. Marcus ran with his squad, firing at every enemy he saw. The Keithrani shields flashed and flickered, but at close range, some shots got through. Aliens fell, their purple blood mixing with the dust and debris. Human soldiers fell too, cut down by return fire, but the charge did not slow. Johnson reached the first defensive position, a ring of barriers surrounding a tall antenna. He threw a grenade over the top and ducked as the explosion tore the structure apart. The antenna toppled, crashing into a group of Keithrani soldiers and crushing them beneath twisted metal. Yuki was beside Marcus, her calm focus unchanged even in the middle of the battle. She spotted a fuel depot and pointed. "If we hit that, it takes out half their vehicles." "Cover me," Marcus said. He sprinted toward the depot, zigzagging to avoid the shots that screamed past him. Alien fire scorched the ground at his feet and something burned his shoulder, but he did not stop. He reached the depot, planted his last explosive charge, and ran. The explosion lit up the night. A column of fire rose into the sky, and secondary explosions rippled outward as vehicles caught and burned. The heat was intense even from a distance, and Marcus felt his skin blistering as he dove behind a wall. "Beautiful," Yuki said, pulling him to his feet. "Now the command center." They pushed forward through the smoke and chaos. Keithrani soldiers were everywhere now, pouring from buildings to stop the human attack. The fighting became close and brutal, rifles and knives against alien claws and energy weapons. Marcus lost track of how many times he fired, how many times he swung his weapon like a club when the ammunition ran out. Sergeant Rivera fell somewhere in the middle of the fight. Marcus saw her go down, a flash of purple light cutting through her chest. She did not cry out. She simply collapsed, and then she was gone. There was no time to mourn. There was only the next enemy, the next step, the next breath. By the time they reached the command center, fewer than 50 soldiers remained. They were wounded, exhausted, and running on nothing but will, but they had made it. The command center was a dome of black metal, covered in the strange symbols of the Keithrani language. Energy barriers surrounded it, and guards stood at every entrance. It looked impenetrable. "We need to get inside," Johnson said, studying the structure. "The disruptor might work on those barriers." "Then use it," Marcus said. Johnson nodded and raised the device. The pulse went out and the barriers flickered. For a moment they held. Then slowly they began to fail. "Now," Marcus shouted. They hit the doors with everything they had left. Grenades and gunfire tore through the guards, and the soldiers poured into the building. Inside, the air was cold and strange, filled with a hum that made Marcus's teeth ache. Screens covered the walls, showing images of battles across the world. Other cities were fighting too, he realized. Humanity was resisting everywhere. At the center of the room stood a Keithrani unlike any Marcus had seen before. It was taller than the others, its armor more ornate, its eyes burning with an intensity that made him want to look away. This was their leader, the one who commanded the invasion. "You should not have come here," the leader said. Its voice was deep and cold, like the sound of ice cracking. "You have only hastened your own end." "Maybe," Marcus answered, "but we came anyway." He raised his rifle and fired. The battle in the command center was short but fierce. The Keithrani leader was stronger and faster than any soldier Marcus had faced, shrugging off shots that would have killed ordinary aliens. But the humans pressed forward, fighting with a fury that transcended their exhaustion. Johnson tackled the leader from behind, wrapping his massive arms around its throat. Yuki fired at its legs, trying to bring it down. Other soldiers joined, attacking from every angle. The leader threw them off one by one, its strength seemingly endless. But humanity did not stop. Every time a soldier fell, another took their place. Every wound they inflicted was another crack in the creature's armor, and finally, one of those cracks proved fatal. Marcus did not know whose shot did it. Maybe it was his, maybe it was someone else's. But suddenly the leader stumbled, purple blood pouring from a wound in its side. Its eyes flickered and its movement slowed. One of the soldiers, a young woman whose name Marcus had never learned, drove a knife into the gap in its armor. The leader fell. For a moment, everything stopped. The Keithrani in the command center looked at their fallen leader with something like disbelief. Then the screens on the walls began to flicker, and a new sound filled the air. It was the sound of Keithrani voices, confused and panicked, calling for orders that would never come. "The command structure is broken," Johnson said, looking at the screens. "They do not know what to do." "Then let us give them something else to think about," Marcus said. They set charges throughout the command center, rigging it to explode. The surviving soldiers retreated, carrying their wounded and leaving their dead. As they ran back toward the human lines, the building behind them erupted in a ball of fire that could be seen for miles. The effect was immediate. Keithrani forces across the city began to fall back, their coordination shattered. Ships that had been providing constant bombardment turned and flew toward the ruined command center, as if searching for answers that were no longer there. The siege was breaking. Dawn came, and with it came reinforcements. This time, they came in numbers too large to count. Armies from every nation on Earth converged on Houston, drawn by the reports of what had happened in the night. They found a city in ruins, but they also found something else. They found soldiers still standing among the rubble, wounded and weary but unbroken. Marcus stood at the edge of the former perimeter, watching the sun rise over the broken buildings. Beside him, Yuki was having her wounds treated by a medic. Johnson sat on a pile of rubble, staring at nothing in particular. Chen had been evacuated hours ago, but word had come that he would survive. Of the 200 soldiers who had entered the tunnels, 37 had returned. The others had given their lives in the command center, in the streets of the enemy camp, in 100 different places where they had stood and fought and refused to surrender. Their names would be remembered. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. "We actually did it," Yuki said quietly. "We actually won." Marcus was not sure one was the right word. The Keithrani were retreating, but they were not defeated. Reports said they were regrouping beyond the moon, perhaps preparing for another assault. The war was not over. It might never be over. But for this moment, for this single day, humanity had proven something to itself and to the universe. They had shown that they would not go quietly. They had shown that even when facing impossible odds, they would stand and fight. A transport vehicle rolled up, and an officer Marcus did not recognize stepped out. He looked at the ragged group of survivors with something like awe in his eyes. "You are the ones who took out their command center?" he asked. Marcus nodded. He was too tired for words. The officer saluted. "The whole world is talking about what you did here. They are calling you heroes." Heroes? Marcus thought about the word. He thought about Rivera dying without a sound. He thought about Chen, whispered his last words through pain. He thought about all the soldiers who had not made it back, whose bodies still lay in the ruins of the enemy camp. "We are not heroes," he said finally. "We are just humans. We do what we have to do." The officer nodded slowly. "Maybe that is what makes you heroes." There would be more battles, more pain, more death. The Keithrani would return and humanity would face them again. But as Marcus watched the sun climb higher into the sky, he felt something he had not felt since the invasion began. He felt hope. They had stood when they should have fallen. They had fought when they should have surrendered. They had turned despair into something else, something that shone brighter than any alien weapon. They had become legends. And the universe would never forget what humans could do when they refused to give up.